Those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Peter Thornell, and I'm the Collection Development Librarian here at the library. That's a new title, by the way, as of just after the talk last year, which means that it's my job to select and purchase all the material for the adult department. So, kind of a dream job. If you know me at all, you know that I'm the kind of guy that cried when I found that I got the job. Very happy. So the upswing of that is that I get to have lots of fun looking at the new books and movies and CDs and audiobooks and ebooks and everything that's coming in the library. The downside of that is that my own personal reading wish list is obscene because I see every single book that comes in. So now I have this list of hundreds of books that I want to read that I will never get to. Having said that, clearly I read lots and lots of books, love to talk about books, love to talk with you about books. And that's the point of this talk every year, to just bring attention to some of the books that were really well reviewed, were really loved by patrons and people, but just didn't get that extra push, word of mouth, for everybody to hear them. I always qualify my talk saying that I didn't just choose these on my own. I go through lots of best of the year lists and talk to different patrons and staff and everything and make one big list, and then I filter that through my own thoughts of what I think will work or what I like. And so hopefully I have a few books here that the majority of you have not already read. There always are a few that you have. But even if you have read them, it's too late now. I've got them here, so here we go. There are always one or two books every year that I hesitate on adding because I think that everybody must have read them by now. And this is one of those worries. But this is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. How many of you have read this book already? Oh, I love it. I love that. I'm glad that you read it, but I'm glad that everybody else didn't, because I'm always terrified that I'm going to pull up a book and everybody's going to go, yeah, I loved it, or I hated it, why are you talking about it? But this is a great book. I should also mention briefly, I mentioned this book, I have a newsletter now, a bi-weekly newsletter if you are interested. It's kind of an online version of this that comes out every other Monday. And there's just basically 3 books, fiction and nonfiction. So we can talk about that later, but this was already talked about in that. For those of you who have not read it, which is thankfully just about everybody, the plot in its absolutely most basic, cut away from everything else, is very, very simple. There's a troupe of actors and musicians who are wandering the wilds of the Great Lakes region, performing Shakespeare and music, basically just trying to keep life and art going because, as the unofficial motto of the book says, survival is insufficient. That's really it when you look at it. That's the plot. But what makes it so amazing is the world in which Mandel has placed this book. The story, the group of artists is wandering the woods of the Great Lakes region because a virus has swept over the planet and most of humanity has been killed. Now, stop right there. I'm very honest and say that I happen to like dystopian fiction if it's done really well, which it isn't always. This is done exceptionally well, and one of the reasons is that it doesn't focus on the dystopian plague aspect so much as it focuses on the people. So it's not this sci-fi fantasy book, but it's a brilliant look at what people do to get by. As it says, survival is insufficient. What's great about it is the interaction between the characters and the way Mandel reveals things about the characters as we move through the story. Some reviewers called it a mystery. I don't particularly agree with that, but I will say that lots of things happen which both pull you into the story and keep you kind of one step away from what she's trying to pull off. We touch base with lots of different characters, and there's these wonderful flashbacks to time before the plague and the time just in the early days of it. And connections are made between the characters that didn't feel forced for me at all, which was great, because in these kind of books, this dystopian world where something bad happens, the first sign of a bad writer is if you're going to kill off 10 million people, the fact that this one little group of friends survives is not really plausible, And it happens a lot, Oh, look, it's my boyfriend. No, it's not. He's dead. It only happens because the author needed it to happen. And this, while there are connections, it doesn't feel forced at all, because it's this just like-minded people gather when they have nothing else to do, and it becomes this wonderful kind of journey. It is kind of a fantastic, in fantasy language, conceit, but it feels really, really plausible. Did you two go along with it? Yeah? And a lot of people who worked here loved it after I mentioned it on the website, and because A, it's just beautifully written literary fiction, and B, she sets up a great story for the novel kind of without even the plague idea, just the idea of this troop of people and what they do and how they are there for each other. It was a finalist for the National Book Award last year, and it lost to another book that I'm going to talk about later on. But I do think you really enjoy it, and it ran through the staff really quickly once. People who don't read, like they heard what it was about, like the dystopian, oh, I don't read that, and they all loved it. Which doesn't mean you're going to love it, but you know, I have to boost my qualifications here. But it's a really great book. This next one, and I always come across a few, it's something I had to include, not just because it had great reviews, but because I love books that provide us a little look into things that we never would have otherwise had an insight. And this is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. Thank you very much. By Caitlin Doughty. I have long believed that knowledge of death can greatly increase our capacity to handle it and process it. This doesn't mean that we don't get sad when people die. It doesn't mean we're all, you know, unicorns and rainbows when we're ill. But knowledge has been proven to help people cope with their own experience of it. And this is a really fascinating but kind of darkly funny look at what happens in a crematory. And it is fairly detailed on occasion, and so it's a little gory at times. But it talks about the history of funeral practices, or more specifically the practices surrounding how we handle the bodies of those who died. A very strong case is made here more by example than by kind of a heavy-handedness, that culturally we've lost touch with the process of dying, since so much of it is farmed out to hospitals and nursing homes and care homes, where it used to be very home-based. And Caitlin herself, the author, took a job in a crematory in San Francisco as a job, which soon became her chosen profession. And this book is basically the chronicle of her first 6 years in that position. As you might imagine, I don't know why, I don't know, but it's a very male-dominated field. I think women are just too smart to go into it. But she loved it, and she talks about that aspect of it, and she talks about her life and her friends and how the experiences she's gleaned here give her a deeper perspective on her life and her friends. And again, it's just one of those books that every year I got a couple of them that tells us something about a part of the world we have no knowledge of. I certainly had no knowledge of the details of it. And some of the anecdotes are interesting, you know, fascinating, a bit disturbing at times, but again, this darkly funny. I think she'd almost have to be kind of a dark kind of gallows humor to do this day after day. But it's a very interesting look at the process. It's very, very well written and entertaining. She has a wonderful voice, and I hope she's going to continue writing, because I'm not sure writing was her main goal. So I don't know. I'm sure we'll hear from her again, because the book did really, really well. But it's a very engaging book, and so there's that one. This one, okay, this is the kind of book you could lose yourself in for a day or two. And it's a bit out of the ordinary for me, but it was too much fun for me to ignore. And it's by Randall Munroe, and it's called What If? Serious Scientific Answers to Absurd Hypothetical Questions. Munroe lives in Cambridge, Mass. Used to work for NASA. And he has this very cool website called XKCD, which doesn't actually mean anything. It's just 4 letters, which may give you a sense of where this guy's head's at. The website is for a web comic he created that's a very math, science-y comic that's hysterical. But it's also home to this series called What If, where he answers these absurd questions. And the first question of the book, for example, says, what would happen if the Earth and all terrestrial objects suddenly stopped spinning, but the atmosphere retained its velocity? So all of a sudden, Earth stops. Wind, wind, wind. And the answer starts off saying, nearly everyone would die. Then things would get interesting. And I liked it right from there. The rest of the answer goes on for about 5 pages, and it's funny, and it's fascinating, and it's scientifically accurate, as accurate as you can be. So this is, again, one of those kind of esoteric books, but for anyone who likes the planet, weather, science, all varieties, I mean, a 10-year-old would love this book too. It's a fascinating book because you learn a lot of things about life and the planets and the human body and its relation to everything else. So, for example, someone else asked a question. There's a lot of these. In the hypothetically bizarre range, this is one of those great questions. If someone's DNA suddenly vanished, how long would they last? And it's not really a tenable question, but he answers it. So basically, you'd lose about 1/3 of a pound, which isn't much. But since you can't actually, it's pretty out there as a concept, he answers it in the best way he can, which is to look at what would happen if your DNA was deeply damaged. So he goes into how that can happen. Aside from obvious things like radiation and chemotherapy, mushroom poisoning, which apparently goes right. It's fascinating little. I just like little books I learn little stuff. So there's lots of things to be learned kind of on the surface, but the questions are so odd. But how he gets to the kernel of it is really fascinating. So again, it's more of a scientific diversion than a narrative, but it's fascinating. I just couldn't. I kept seeing it on these review lists. It's on one of the other things that happens. I see all these different lists, and a book will come up, and I'll just, that's not right for us, and no. The 7th time I see it, I'm like, okay, I have to include this book, and it's great. It's a lot of fun, and I'm going to counter it with the absolute polar opposite, which is full-on narrative bliss. It's the first in a series of books, and I'm going to get his name wrong, but it's Karl Ove Knausgaard, who's Norwegian, and he's basically become Norway's Proust. And have any of you heard of this book? It's one of the. It's making. Okay, I'm going to keep looking at you two. You're reading everything. And it's called My Struggle, and I don't make the Proust comment lightly. It's very literary, highly biographical piece of fiction, and like Proust, since it's 6 volumes, it's going to eventually become one of those books that everybody says they've read when they actually haven't. But it's great because, in essence, it's nothing more or less than his life story, with very specific and detailed information about his life and the people involved in his life, though in the form of fiction. And the bit about including people from his life is part of the controversy of the book in Norway. It's wildly popular. Norway has like 5 million residents, and it's sold 500,000 copies. So, what is that, 1 in 10? I mean, it's a ridiculous number of people that are looking at this book. So this little controversy, the first part of the controversy is because of the title, because there's another famous book called My Struggle, but it was written in German. It's called Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. So he's not a Hitler devotee, but I think he's the kind of guy who chose the title because he likes stirring things up. But that was the first controversy. The other part, and one of the reasons probably that it's so ridiculously popular, is there was almost this reality TV-like moment to it, where as it came out and as it started to build, journalists would seek out the people that were mentioned in the book, because most of them are mentioned by their names. Only a few were given pseudonyms at their request. So people like his ex-wife or his uncle or past girlfriends or friends were given the full glare kind of at the spotlight he had, regardless of whether they had used their real names or not. They kind of would ferret these people out. And a girlfriend of his, actually, who was featured in the 5th volume, and I should mention, it's a 6-volume set. The first 3 volumes have already been published here. The 4th one's coming out in a few months. The other ones will be along. But when his girlfriend was asked about the book and her place in the book, she had this wonderful quote that I had to write down here. She said, quote, "It was as if he said, 'Now I'm going to punch you in the face. I know it's going to hurt, and I will drive you to the hospital afterwards, but I'm going to do it anyway.'" Which is quite a statement. And he's not necessarily a mean guy, but he knows he's losing some relationships with his writing, but he's just trying to get at something about life and honesty and being true to himself, which unfortunately pulls in the people around him. But he has said at one point that he wished he could go back and take out a couple things, just because in retrospect, I think he caught a little bit too much heat for them. But he tells these wonderful stories, although he doesn't really tell stories. Again, in a Proustian way, he just recounts these moments, and often at length. There's one in this book. There's about 50 or 60 pages devoted to a New Year's Eve when he's 16. And nothing really dramatic happened. It's just how he describes the moment, and he just takes his time. And his commitment to the story and to his life is just, it's fascinating. So I'm not saying you need to read all 6. That one's on you. But it is a stunning piece of writing, and it's different. It is, you just kind of lose yourself in the book. But it's certainly worth losing yourself in for a few hours or days, whatever it takes. But it's a very unique and stunning book. I have lots of kind of esoteric books this year. I don't know why. This next one is a very special little book. It's also one of those books that it feels nice. It's like heavy. It's like an art book, like really nice paper and pictures, and I'm not here by accident. I'm a geek about stuff like that. So this is a great one. This is called Schubert's Winter Journey, Anatomy of an Obsession by Ian Bostridge. For those of you who have not had the good fortune to hear Winter Journey or Winterreise, it is considered one of, if not the greatest song cycles in classical music. And it was first published in 1828, right at the end of Schubert's life, when he did what all great composers seem to do and died early at 31, which blows my mind. He took 24 poems by Wilhelm Müller and set them to music for piano and tenor. The pieces, if you haven't heard them, are very somber. They're extremely powerful, and for leader songs of that time, Schubert used the piano in a much more of a kind of duet capacity than was common. It was typically just the piano accompaniment, but the feature was the singer, and this was a real tandem between the piano and the voice. And Ian Bostridge, who wrote this book, has performed Winterreise numerous times. He just turned 50 a couple months ago. He's a wonderful singer. And this work was so important to him that he decided to create this book, this tribute to the cycle. And what's wonderful is that he writes about the songs themselves. He writes about Schubert's intentions and his hopes for the work. He writes about the societal issues and the times in which it happens. It's a very kind of scholarly and experienced commentary on everything, but it's still very readable and almost poetic in its prose. If you're not familiar with it, I had to quote from it to give you a sense of how this thing starts off. The very first song is called Good Night. Again, it's the first song, Good Night. That's interesting right there. But the lyrics to the very first piece in the cycle are, the first stanza anyway, I came a stranger, I depart a stranger. May was good to me, May the month was good to me. The girl, she talked of love, the mother even of marriage. Now the world is so gloomy, the way is shrouded in snow. And that's how it starts. There's no easing into this one. It's just, but it's beautiful. It's an incredible piece of music. If you haven't heard it, I have 3 or 4 copies of it up in the CD department too. It's just wonderful. But this is a really terrific accompaniment. Each song has its own chapter, which starts off with the lyrics in German and English, and then you get Ian's study. And what's so great about that is that, again, he talks about what Schubert was trying to do, what Müller was trying to do in the poems, and then he maybe digresses into these other relevant thoughts on the topics. There's one song called The Post, which is about the singer waiting for a letter that doesn't, from a love that doesn't arrive. So he adds to his discussion a brief history of the post service in Germany and Austria. And it's fascinating because it's horses and carriages and people. It's just this lovely little diversion that really also puts you in 1828, So this, even maybe more than the What If one, is one of the most esoteric books I've mentioned because it's really, it's about a very specific piece of music, but I don't think you have to love that music to love the book. It's just beautifully written. And the Schubert songs are wonderful. I just listened to them again last night in prep, and it's great. But it's a very special little book. Okay. I'm pushing boundaries today. I really went back and forth on including these next ones, but in the end, again, they were too unique, too widely praised for me not to include. And I personally love them. Last year, a man named Jeff Vandermeer published a trilogy called the Southern Reach Trilogy. And it consists of 3 books called Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. I don't know if they'll stand up. So, it's a little bit science fiction, a little bit almost horror, a little bit of a nature study in a way, but it's all around fascinating. And the first book deals with an area called Area X, which is being studied by a group called the Southern Reach. They're the name of the trilogy. And this Area X, while it's never stated as being in Florida, is in Florida. And it's this huge area of land that has been enclosed by an invisible border for decades. And all traces of civilization have been kind of stripped away by this accelerated regrowth of plants and animals taking over again. And the first book details an expedition, an all-female expedition into Area X, and it's the 11th expedition sent in by this group. The trick of it is things did not go well for any of the previous expeditions, but the 11th expedition doesn't know that. And the story arc over the trilogy is pretty simple. The first book details this expedition. The second deals with how the Southern Reach organization deals with the results of that expedition and gives us a larger view of the organization itself. And then the main story of the final volume, because there are a few overlapping, but the main one follows 2 people as they venture back into Area X to try and find some final answers to what's happening. NPR called the book the best haunted lighthouse story ever, and I think that covers the entire series. The plot, if there is one, is kind of slow to develop, and I will say that I probably thought more about this book as I was reading it than anything I've ever read, like just kind of, okay, what does that mean? You know, it's a little surreal, but the tone is just lyrical and kind of haunting at the same time. And I've never read anything like it, and I absolutely loved it. And this is one of those series that I know it's not for everybody, but it's a fascinating as a literary effort to me. And it's being made into a film soon, which I'm fascinated to see because I really want to see this world made live, but I also don't think Hollywood can actually pull off a story where things aren't all answered. You know, there's lots of unanswered questions, and Hollywood doesn't like unanswered questions, so I'm curious to see what happens. But it's just an ingenious little book, and if you don't give it a try, recommend it to somebody you know who might like it. But they're wonderful stories. Okay. Every year, again, I never, it seems like I have a quota on these talks. When I've done every year, there has to be, you know, a book like this, a couple adventure books, a couple of this books. I don't do that. I've never done that. And yet if you look back over all the lists, it happened. I don't intend it. But I always find at least one kind of historical adventure disaster piece of nonfiction, which are great. This year it's by Hampton Sides, and it's called In the Kingdom of Ice, the Grand and Terrible Polar Voyage, of the USS Jeanette. And this is a crazily well-reviewed book, just so you know. And it's about a journey to the North Pole that, of course, goes horribly wrong. And it is classic narrative nonfiction in that he's written this story that reads like the best fictional thriller, but is all too powerfully true. And it tells the story of the USS Jeanette and her captain, George Washington DeLong, who set out in 1879 with 32 men into the Arctic in an effort, kind of a two-pronged thing. Number one, just to get to the pole, but also one of the great theories of the time, it was this kind of Arctic fever, you know, exploration quests, that there was a sea up there, an open Arctic sea. So they wanted to find that. And there are a few key players here, notably August Peterman, who was the guy that had this theory of the open Arctic Sea, and James Gordon Bennett Jr., who was this crazy wealthy and probably just flat out crazy guy who funded the expedition. And what's so amazing about the journey isn't just the details, which are great, and I'm sure you can imagine, but the time frame in which the journey happens. So the crux of the story is the ship goes into the Arctic, gets trapped by the ice. Eventually, it sinks, and the men must find a way to get, by boat or marching or across ice lands, find a way to get to safety. But here's the thing. The Jeanette left San Francisco on July 8th in 1879, and it got through the Bering Strait by September, and by late September, it became trapped in the ice pack and drifted to the northwest until the ice eventually damaged the ship so much that it sank. And it sank on June 13th, 1881. What that means is the ship, and it's focused on, but it's the part that I can't get out of my head. What it means is that the ship was trapped in this ice pack, drifting along at like a dead snail's pace for almost 2 years. They got up there in like 2 months, and then they just drift for I can't comprehend that. And the fact that any of them survived, which a fair number did, is astounding. But it's just a classic tale of, of kind of the late period of adventure where people tried to go off and conquer what they wanted to conquer, and the powers that be let them conquer it as much as they would. It's a stunning journey. He's a really wonderful writer, and he used some of the journals and letters of some of the survivors and their loved ones in the story. And he's written a bunch of great books. One of them you may have heard of was called Ghost Soldiers in 2001, which is about a successful rescue mission of about 500 POWs from the Philippines in '45. He's a great writer. It's a great story. I cannot imagine 2 years adrift. I can't imagine it. I can almost imagine the cold, marching across. I just can't imagine just sitting there in a boat for 2. I just can't do it. I don't know. But it's a heck of a book. It's really good. This next one is called Five Came Back, the story of Hollywood in the Second World War. And it's the second book from Mark Harris. His first book, Pictures of a Revolution, was in my 2008 talk, and I absolutely adored that book. Loved that book. And I'm glad to say that this is another amazing study of the history of cinema and the power of movies to stretch far beyond just a couple hours in the theater. The book tells about how, in a time when the government was becoming kind of wary of Hollywood and the power they thought they had to put out possibly un-American views and approaches into the minds of millions, while they were conflicted about that, they were also in dire need of their help because they were entering into World War II and they wanted the help of Hollywood to basically stir up propaganda in support of the war effort. What actually happened was amazing and became a lot more than just a few films. 5 directors were actually drawn into the military, given rank and offices and everything. And what they created was both what you might expect, which is traditional films like Mrs. Miniver, William Wyler's Mrs. Miniver, that was created as part of this, that were wartime themes. But also, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, they actually filmed battles while they were taking place. And both for historical records and for, those little film series they would watch before the movies to give people a sense of what was going on. Now, what's fascinating about this for me as a film buff is the 5 directors, because the people they chose were not just 5 directors. They chose John Ford, George Stevens, John Huston, William Wyler, and Frank Capra. Arguably the greatest directors of their time, and they were on ships and in the air filming actual battles. They weren't, herding this out to somebody else. They were there filming these actual battles. And it was just, it's stunning to know what they did. And there's one moment that I really love, which is about Frank Capra, where he in particular had a hard time finding out how to begin, what angle was to approach as far as the documentary aspects. And so he was in New York, and he went around to all these film societies trying to find all of the pro-Nazi propaganda films he could find, of which there were a ton. Germany was really, really good about creating pro-Nazi propaganda. The greatest one of all you probably all heard of, The Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl, which he had not seen yet, and most of the other directors had. He watched the film in '42, and when he was done with it, the film was, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it's amazing. And the power of the film was such that Frank Capra said, I don't think we're going to win this war. Based on the film. That's what's drumming them up. We don't have that. And then he sat down and he thought about it, and he realized that what he could do was, and his series was called Why We Fight, was the series that he ran. And he took these countless hours of German and Japanese and Italian propaganda films and cut them in a way to not show what Americans were fighting for, but what they're fighting against. And he just turned it around, and it was very successful, and he found his in. But it was just amazing how the experiences they had affected not just their creative life, but their personal lives in their involvement. And it's absolutely fascinating story. Mark Harris, as always, he's a journalist. He was a journalist for Entertainment Weekly for a long time. I think he still writes occasionally for them. But he's a wonderful, wonderful writer. And it's full of all kinds of details and anecdotes that puts you right back in the 40s. And again, another piece of kind of forgotten history that I love. So there's that one. Okay, now we're kind of back to the beginning, because I mentioned Station 11 at the top was a finalist for the National Book Award, and this is the one that actually won the National Book Award last year. It's called Redeployment by Phil Clay. And it's a collection of stories. Clay himself has kind of an interesting bio in that he went to Dartmouth and then joined the Marines and was in Iraq during the surge. And then when he came back, went to Hunter College to get an MFA. So as you imagine from him being a Marine, and the title of these are war stories, and it's an amazing collection that touches on both the frontline experiences as well as the experiences they have after the front lines. And what got me right away wasn't the content, but just his style. He can write really, really well. And it's his first book. And I've said this, I know I repeat myself a lot for those of you who've been here over the years, but there's something really great about a first collection, especially in stories, because there's a real clarity to the work. There's no kind of burden of following something up. The characters they choose to write about and the stories they choose to tell are really important to them. This is all they have. This is what they're fighting for. And so he focuses on these kind of small, thoughtful moments, so it doesn't have a lot of the kind of bravado or swagger of some war fiction. There's really quiet moments. Not all of them, but predominantly. And one story I absolutely loved, which is the strangest one in the book. It's only a few pages long, and it's called OIF. And it's just packed with acronyms and jargon to the point that it's almost incomprehensible. OIF actually stands for Operation Iraqi Freedom, but you wouldn't know that from the story because it doesn't explain any of the acronyms. He just hits you over and over again with this jargon that is understandable to probably only a select few people in the world at this point. And what I felt was it really helped create a picture of how kind of fragmented and distanced the art of waging war is. It's like, you don't want to talk about what's actually happening, so you speak in jargon. And it was great. And I kept trying to find the best way to describe the book, but there's a quote in the book jacket that I wanted to read because it's simple, but it's perfect. These stories reveal the intricate combination of monotony, bureaucracy, comradeship, and violence that make up a soldier's daily life at war, and the isolation, remorse, and despair that can accompany a soldier's homecoming. It's a very strong book, very powerful stuff, very honest about wartime and people in wartime, so there is a fair amount of profanity and such and everything. But I'm really curious to see what he, as a writer, does next. Especially when you focus on war stories as a soldier, it's almost like you either keep doing that or you break completely left or right and see what you do. So he's a very young guy, so I'm curious to see what he does next. This one, I have a little war theme going on. I didn't realize that until just this second, which is strange since I've been working a while on this. And this is another one I mentioned in the online version of the talk. Does anybody get the biweekly newsletter that we send out? Yeah? Okay. Again, just in case you're curious, it's basically an online version of this. So what happens, just so you know, you can go on the website and there's a little place to sign up for newsletters. And there's a whole bunch of different things for adult events and children's events, and one for movies and music. And this one's called HPL Collection Highlights. And it's every other Monday. And basically what I do is I look at what's coming in literally fresh out of the boxes, and I just find books that I look through them all, see if something's interesting or just I hadn't heard of, and I put it up there for people to find out about stuff, because there's so many books out there that people are never going to hear of, which is kind of the point of this. And this way I can keep doing it all throughout the year, which is going to make it really hard, I know, next year for me to do this talk, because I'm going to have to really squirrel around to find books I haven't already talked about. But in those cases, just so you all know, if you do get it, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and people seem to like it. But with this book, if I haven't read them all, I've read large segments of these. These I'm literally I'm going off of my gut and looking at them and looking at instincts. And so far it's going really well, and I wound up reading a lot of them after the fact, again, which is like the pile of books I have to read at home is insane. But it's the worst problem, I guess, to have, right? I intentionally didn't want to repeat anything, but I kind of figured that not everybody was getting it yet. So this was another one that was on that list, and it's called When Books Went to War, The Stories That Helped Us Win World War II. And this book is like a perfect storm for this talk. There's no way I couldn't do it, because it's well written, it's about books, it's historical, and it's about a piece of history we've never heard of, and it involves librarians. So there's no way I wasn't going to talk about it. The essence of the tale is really, really simple. In World War II, Germany was banning and burning millions of books. And a bunch of people, as the book calls them, quote, outraged librarians. And I'll tell you, nothing quite as scary as a bunch of marauding, outraged librarians. They decided to start these book drives all over the country to gather books to send over to the troops. Twofold. And they were pretty honest about it. One, they wanted to support the troops, and one, they kind of wanted to stick it to Nazi censorship. They wanted to flood the place with these books. Eventually, publishers got involved and realized that hardcover books, no matter how small they are, were just not tenable. They weren't functional for them. So this process of sending the books to the troops jump-started the paperback movement, which had only started a couple years before. I think it was Penguin that started the first paperbacks, which is England probably. But it was really fresh. It was not a common thing. And this jump-started because it was just easy for the troops to carry the books. And then in 1943, the War Department got involved and really took the reins and wound up shipping 120 million books to the troops. And there were 1,200 different titles that they published in the series. And the list is in the back, which is fascinating, because it's like, what books do you send? And there are some books, like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, that became famous almost because of this. It's fascinating the way things happened. But for me, I mean, a typically non-outraged librarian, it was just a wonderful sentiment to the power of books and reading, and the fact that probably the only time that publishers and the government and librarians were all completely on the same side, and did this wonderful project. Eisenhower was obviously still a general at this time, and even then was always known as a very avid reader, but he placed a very high value on troop morale, so he really spearheaded it. And it's a fascinating story, and I think it's perfect for us. And it's a fairly brief read, but it's just fascinating. You'd be proud to be a librarian, and it's a good book. And this is I'm going to have a brief review of a brief book. And I have said this before over the years. I have a serious thing for short books, for little books, like Lily Tuck books. I don't know. I love. If I ever write a book, it's going to be about this size. I just love short, little, accessible books that read like poetry. And I'm always thrilled when one comes along because they don't that often anymore. And this is this lovely little book called Department of Speculation by Jenny Ophil. And it's basically the story of a marriage, but a marriage that's having some problems. And the title, Department of Speculation, comes from a postmark that this couple would use for love letters to each other, referring to the unknowns of the future. And the focus of the book is the wife, who is only referred to as the wife. And her thoughts and the thoughts of the third-person narrator are expressed almost as these brief, I'll probably show you. I mean, they're all like these brief little journal entries, just these little, it's perfect. I want to steal the format. I love it. I love poetry a lot too, so books that look like that just send me over the edge. So that's what's so intriguing about it for me is the structure. Because the plot as it is it's revealed in a fairly straight line, and it's her narrative thoughts kind of move back and forth between straightforward commentary on the relationship, but then these little musings about marriage, or the sequence on bedbugs, or the sequence on Russian cosmonauts, which sounds odd but are completely relevant in the moment, and the analogies that she draws are just beautiful. And the analogies help the wife try to answer these questions she has about herself and her marriage. And it's just this beautifully delicate, sad little book. And it is sad, but it's still an amazing read. And it's not sad in like an everybody dies kind of way, but it's sad in like a, the unique way to not just the troubled marriage, but those little moments in life that just don't go the way we want them to go. That little bit of disappointment. Which always gets me, and I've said before, I cry at Campbell Soup ads, so I love these kind of profound little books. So it's a lovely book. I hope you give that one a chance. I'm gonna have a sip of water here. This next one is called On Immunity, and it's by Eula Biss, and it's one of those books that I think would always be interesting, but I chose it a couple months ago actually, but it might be even more appropriate nowadays because of that whole recent measles outbreak in California, and it's starting the conversation again. And the full title of the book is actually On Immunity and an Inoculation. And I think it could easily be said the book is kind of an inoculation against kind of the confusion or fear around the issues of immunity and vaccinations. And it doesn't mean that it's not like it's like a staunchly pro-vaccination book. You do find out Biss's thoughts on the issue by the end, but the point is really to talk about the concept and cultural desire for immunity, and whether it's even attainable or not, So she talks about smallpox and AIDS and the flu and vaccines and what's in vaccines and what's believed to be in vaccines, and all the while keeping a very kind of fact-based tone, and definitely supporting the medical community's belief that all children should be vaccinated, but giving complete full credence to the concerns and fears of those who worry about them. And which is great, because most books that even touch vaccination, they're either completely one side or the other. And this really looks at the whole spectrum of it. And there's actually a large section of notes in the back of the book that I'm one of those people that, read all those notes and nonfiction. The last 200 pages full of notes, I will read those. And these are some of the best ever, because they really do contribute. I'm always fascinated by that, like why didn't you just put that in the book? I don't understand. So, but these are they're wonderful. And I think what makes the book really work is the fact that, as well as she's a very respected, research-oriented nonfiction writer, but she also wrote the book as a new mother. And my kids just turned 8, so I really remember the vaccination process, and I could kind of relate to her sense of, like informed concern, I know it's supposed to be fine, I know it's supposed to be fine, but you're still waiting like every hour after it's done to see if, so I really connected with that. And everything she talks about, mercury and thimerosal and triclosan, that antibacterial agent that was in everything up until a few years ago, all the food allergies people develop, possibly because of our use or overuse of some of these things. I just dropped my microphone. And the very thought-provoking issue that she has of vaccination and health in general as being an economic issue, a status issue of those that are immune or those that can afford to be immune, and culturally, not just individually. It's a very reasoned, kind of fast-paced, but non-polemical kind of book. Really focuses on knowledge and the idea that lack of knowledge can really create fear of issues, whether they're valid or not. But just it's a really good approach to it, and I just thought it was great the way it looked at our undeniable desire to protect our children and ourselves, and lengths we go to try to achieve that. It was very interesting. There's one little fact, I don't know if I wasn't going to say this, but it's this random fact that I thought was interesting. An issue of if there were 40 people and you vaccinated 39 of them, in a group, say this room, okay, everyone was vaccinated except for one, or no one was vaccinated except for one, which one of those single people would be better off? And it was the one where no one was vaccinated, because whatever the illness was had a chance to spread. But where everybody was vaccinated, only one person was in the room, you're now the target. Which was a fact. I never thought of it that way, and it was really interesting. Like, that's why these things proliferate, because all you need is one person. So the argument was just really well written, and again, a very balanced look at it, which I was pleased to see. Okay. One more really good adventure kind of story with local interest. This one's called Trapped Under the Sea by Neil Swidey. I believe it's Swidey. I'm usually really good. I get, even like Jenny Ophil, I was like, how do I say that name? I looked it up. I make sure I hear the person say it. I hate mispronouncing names. I didn't look up this one, but for some reason right now I just question myself. But I think it's Neil Swidey. And the subtitle for this book is One Engineering Marvel, 5 Men, and a Disaster 10 Miles into the Darkness. And what makes it really cool is that it's about a very memorable moment in Boston history. As you will all clearly remember, Boston Harbor used to be, less than clean. And so back in the 90s, when they began construction of construction of the Deer Island treatment plant and the 10-mile-long tunnel that brings that water out into the bay for release. And the book is not really a history of that project, but it's a narrative exploration of the inevitable problem that all these things have problems. This one happened to be worse than others, but when there was an issue in this massive tunnel that required 5 men to go into the tunnel to clear these plugs that would allow the processed water to rise up into the bay. But something went very wrong in this process, and the 5 divers went in and 2 of them died. And the story around it is it's remarkable in all these different ways, because it's a 10-mile long tunnel. And you could fit cars in this. It's huge. And so they had a fairly common ventilation system for a large part of people were working, because it's I don't know how far it is underwater, but by the time they got down to the end of the tunnel where these men wound up working, they had this either very innovative or very bizarre method of recycling the air, where they actually mixed liquid oxygen, nitrogen on the spot. And that may have had something to do with it, and it becomes then this bit of a mystery police story following the officers that were assigned to figure out what happened. And Swidey himself is a staff writer for the Globe, so he was perfectly placed to really look at, follow the political, legal, and corporate interests that involve this whole thing. And he really gives the perfect kind of journalistic touch to the whole story. Gets into the lives of the divers and the training they went into beforehand that led up to them first entering the tunnel. A very kind of you are there kind of feel to it. And so you've got local history and strong writing and political and corporate wrangling as only we can do in Boston. And it's a very exciting book. And again, a little piece of history to some other, I love that. And historically, people who come to the talk seem to too. So I'm not just me, but they do well. This next one is another first novel, again that I love, and it's called Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This is another one that people may have read. How many people have read this one? Okay, again. I'll be careful, you guys, next year. I'm creating my own list now for next year. My favorite part of this book is it kicks right off from the first line. I love, again, I haven't had a reason to worry about it this year, but I always make a very clear point of not revealing too much about books, especially fiction books. Anything more than you could read on the blurb, and sometimes less than that, because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But this is the first line of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. But it's just, the first line is, Lydia is dead, but they don't know this yet. I was in. I was ready. I was, perfect. It's right. And the they in the line is her family. And the setting for that intro is the Lee family kitchen in 1977. And so the other kids are getting ready for school. The husband, James, is on his way to work. Marilyn, the mom, goes upstairs to wake up the middle daughter and realizes she's not home. And that's how it starts off. But what happens is we learn about the Lee family, and that's when Ng's writing, for me, really comes out. It's a Chinese-American family living in a small town in Ohio in the 70s, so there are issues of subtle and overt racism that the family encounters in their lives. The father, who's always kind of felt a step out of place or trapped by kind of like preconceptions of who he is and who he's seen as a Chinese-American. And Marilyn, the mother, is probably kind of the most classic literary and unfortunately probably real type of a woman who had aspirations and dreams and set them aside for her family, and then places them firmly on her middle and favorite daughter and expects her to do everything she didn't do. And the middle daughter being Lydia, who, as they will soon discover, is dead. So it's not going the way she wanted. But I thought she pulled it off brilliantly because she really develops each of these characters, the parents and the other children. There's a daughter and a son, and Lydia, of course. When something like this happens, the parents question everything. There's lots of theories, as you would, but she places a little more emphasis on Hannah, who's the youngest daughter, who's kind of like a forgotten child who just winds up off on her own, but sees everything. Has a good, she's the one who just sits quietly and takes everything in. So she's the one kind of figuring things out more than others. And it's just this wonderfully written book, lots of heart, a lot of literary skill. And the plot isn't that new. Parents struggle with their own lives and don't realize their children are not exactly who they seem and who they want them to be. But what makes it special is that she's taken this framework and created these particular characters, and has done so with a really elegant style of writing. So it's a very emotional, kind of personal experience. And I think you'll love it. And again, that first line, I was all in from the get-go. Okay, I'm excited about this one. I've always wanted to put a graphic novel in this talk, and I never have. I've probably mentioned a couple. I'm still upset that I didn't mention David Small's Stitches in 2009, which is one of the best books I've ever read. He has a blurb on the back of this, so maybe if you see this, you can read his book. There is nothing wrong with that book. It's perfect. But this year I'm finally doing it, and this book is called Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? By Roz Chast. And this book was so popular for a while last year that I had to order 2 copies to fill the holds, and I never have to do that for graphic novels. I never, ever have to do that. So this is a memoir by the very well-known illustrator and cartoonist Roz Chast. And it's about her complicated relationship with her parents, especially the last years of their lives, as the father suffers from dementia and the mother has this kind of bad fall that begins the long line of her decreasing health, and move through hospitals and assisted living centers and such. It's actually a really good counterpoint, honestly, to The Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, in that they both address the problems that can happen around illness and impending death when you ignore it, when you refuse to deal with it. And fortunately, this book, as you can imagine, deals with it in a fairly funny, or I shouldn't say, I don't know if it's funny, humorous way. But the humor doesn't take away from the seriousness of the topic. I think it just helps communicate the topic. You know what I mean? It helps diffuse the topic. And I talked with one of our staff members who read this, who would never have read a graphic novel, and she absolutely loved it. And we talked about it and said that if you took just the text out, if you just read the text, you would lose all the humor and the the communicability of the plot. It would just be this dry, these conversations. But something about the way she did it, it's wonderful, and the drawings definitely take a lot of the bite out of the stress of the moment, and they infuse that humor that I'm imagining she would have. You almost have to have a way to just get yourself through it. But it's very honest look at the process of dealing with not only ailing parents, but again, ailing parents in denial of the fact that they're ailing. I don't know if any of you have read Art Spiegelman's Maus, which M-A-U-S, which it's about his father in the Holocaust, but it's one of the true classic graphic novels of all time. And one of the marvelous things about that book, aside from his powerful rendition of the war, where he portrayed the Jews were mice and the Germans were cats. I should say, it won the Pulitzer Prize. So don't let the cats and mice thing fool you. It's amazing, amazing work. But what was also so great about it was about Art trying to get a handle on his relationship with his father, who lived through World War II in Germany and concentration camps. And that book came out in '91, and as a longtime graphic novel comic reader, what that did was it created this new avenue for these kind of familial biographical themes to be told in graphic novels. I'm sure they have been told before that, but this was like a landmark. Oh, we can do it this way? We can be this serious and this real? And it started this line of this brilliant era of nonfiction graphic novels, like David Small's Stitches, Raymond Briggs. You've probably all seen Raymond Briggs' children's book, The Snowman. But he wrote a book called Ethel and Ernest about his parents, which is just wonderful. And this book, it's funny, it's touching, it's sobering, it's thought-provoking. So even if you never thought of reading a graphic novel, this may be the perfect one to start on. And it doesn't mean you're going to go grabbing Superman. It just means that graphic storytelling in general is really amazing.
Under graphic novel.
It is. I'm trying to get people to go over there. But people do, but everybody else too. But it's an exceptional book. And now we have my last book. Every year again, I always have kind of one big book in length and scope and everything, and this one is again another one that you might have read. I'll ask again. I'm paying attention to you two. And it's called We Are Not Ourselves by Matthew Thomas. Has anybody read this one? Oh, that's the best news of the day. I was convinced I was going to be preaching to the choir on this one. I'm so happy. Again, first novel. And again, if you're an avid reader, first novels tend to be better than anything else you're reading right now. There's just more impetus by the writer on the first novel. And in this case, the story is about a middle-class family. I'm so happy you haven't read it. I got to stop and collect myself. And it's about a middle-class family named Learys, Ed, Eileen, and eventually their son named Connell. And the best way to describe it may simply be that it's about the middle class in the 20th century. And the natural but problematic desire of wanting more than you have, and the inevitable confusions and disappointments that can occur when you actually get some of those things you think you want, and when, despite all your best intentions, things just don't go as you planned. That's a gross oversimplification, but the seed of the idea is there. And again, I don't want to give anything away, but I can say that what makes it so beautiful and touching is how intimate we're allowed to be with these characters. I mean, how many stories have we read about middle-class families in the 20th century? It's a very common literary fiction theme. But I think Thomas's masterstroke in this book was that he focused really on these three people, this little kind of insular family. It took him 10 years to write this book. So he's had more than enough time to hone this down and really get it where he wants to. And there's one scene, maybe a third of the way through, that just read so natural and real, and it's my favorite scene. Eileen and Connell, the mother and son, are having dinner. Ed is teaching night classes, so he's not there. And Eileen had come home from work and collected Connell at the upstairs neighbors, kind of unwillingly, didn't want to go. Comes downstairs, and they're eating dinner. And Connell starts wolfing down his food, just, to spite his mother. And he starts choking. And Eileen panics and yells for Angelo, who's the dad upstairs where he was playing before. He runs down, gives him kind of a rough version of the Heimlich maneuver, and Connell is fine. But they're both really shaken up. And the catch is, Eileen is a nurse. So she's shaken up that her son just choked, and she's shaken up that she was so overcome with fear that she couldn't do what she should have been able to do. Again, totally natural. I mean, I just love these little natural pieces to this. So she's upset. Connell can't believe what happened. He's kind of in shock. So Eileen gives him some ice cream, and he kind of tacitly just takes it and turns the TV on, and he sits in front of the TV. And then Ed finally comes home and sits beside his son once Eileen has told him what happened. And damn it, I'm going to go. And that's when Connell starts to cry. And that's when he finally relaxes. And when he's sitting with his dad, and his mother's sitting a few chairs away. Now knowing A, she couldn't help him, and then now B, she couldn't help him after either. And it's this little beautiful telling moment about the family. And it's just so well thought out. It's a whole chapter, actually. It's chapter 14. That's the chapter, is that sequence. And it exemplifies for me why the book works so well. It's just this story of life. And who we are and who we want to be, and how who we are and who we want to be don't always match up. And how, because lots of other things actually happen that change the story that I don't want to talk about. But how, we keep trying, and as things keep coming, we have to keep adapting or changing, and that's a big feature of the novel. It's an excellent book, a great kind of just classic novel, and I'm so happy you didn't read it. That's it. As always, I really want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for braving our snow-encrusted parking lot. Hopefully, you will read some of these books or like some of these books. You can take them afterwards if you'd like. As always, I'm not on the desk as much as I used to be, but we love to talk about books and hear what you love and hate and didn't like. And all of us who work at the reference desk, which now includes, if you haven't met them all, Ann Dalton, who's been here for a long time, but Lindsay McGrath, who is new, who's up there now, I believe, and Abby McLean, all of us are all happy to, and myself, of course, are happy to talk with you about books all the time. Trust me, I'll drop anything to do it. And always trying to help you find your next favorite book. That's my goal. So you can take anything you want, and thank you very much for coming. Hopefully I'll see you again next year.